Hello, my name is Dzindzichashvili, and welcome to the series of lectures on comprehensive chess endings. Chess endgames are very, very important part of the games. Well, we know that openings are very important because if you don't play openings correctly, if you play them really badly, you won't make it to the end game. But after you learned your openings more or less, so you passed the opening part and you are in middle game, very frequently in the middle game we have the continuations that will lead by force to the ending, to the end game. And then a lot of times we have to play this end game and we have to try to figure out whether we are winning or losing or whatever. So and what helps a lot of experienced chess players, before they get to endgame, they would know already whether endgame is won or it's a draw, if there is a result can be predicted by the nature of endgame, by the type of the endgame. So we have to, in order for them, they don't know it by experience, they know it because they learned certain endgames in a way that they can predict what the result is going to be. So let's start learning those end games, the ones that we don't have to figure once we get there how to play. We want to know how to play these end games before we get there, because that will help you to decide whether you want to go to that end game or not. If you don't know the end game is lost, and it is lost, you don't want to get there. So what should we start? We should start from very beginning, which is very elementary and most basic end games, pawn endings, king and pawns versus king, bear king, or king and pawns. So king and pawn endings are the easiest type of endings because almost every, not almost, practically every chess, every pawn ending is, you can know what the result is. Every pawn ending, well, there are some rook end games and minor piece end games where you can say one side has an advantage or the other side has an advantage, or position is equal. But that's not the way it is in pawn endings. In pawn endings, there is a win, lose, or draw. It's a very exact science and very predicted results for experienced and strong players. So the elementary ending, the first thing you have to know when you start playing chess and when you start learning openings, is king and pawn versus king. Well, let's run quickly through those type of endgames. And we're going to learn what opposition is. So, for example, here is the position. And in this position, white is going that way. So it does not really matter whose move is it. It is a draw. It is a draw. All black has to do is to know one simple rule of opposition. They play king e6 after e5, king e7, king d5, king d7, d5, king e7, and king e5. In this position, there's only one move that draws, and black must make that move. Black must play king e8. And now, regardless whether white goes to king f6 or king d6, black will play king d8 or king f8, which leads to a draw in both cases. So remember, here is the opposition on king f6, king f8. You see kings opposing each other, and if it's whoever is on the move is suffering from the opposition. Now to white's move, that's why white cannot win. If white pushes e7, king e8, and after king e6 it's a stalemate. However, if it's black's move, then black loses. So because they lose the opposition, they have to stand in king versus king in front of king, and if black has to move king e8, e7, king d7, king f7, of course they lose the game. So the opposition, this is the elementary and very basic example of the opposition. Now let's look at the other opposition. Again, I quickly want to go, I don't want to dedicate too much time to king and pawn versus king, because there are many different ways you can learn it, or you can figure it out even by yourself. Well, here is the opposition, and the result here is white moves, white wins if it's black's move, and it's a draw if it's white's move. If white's move, black holds the opposition, and wherever white goes, black can follow the opposition. Now, but if white pushes the pawn, then black draws by playing king d6 if white does not have king d4 move. So the opposition here is important, not to let white's king in ahead of white's pawn, to kick black out of the central file. For example, if it's black's move in this position, in original position, black loses no matter what they do. On king e6, white goes king c5, and on king c6, king e5. And how it may continue now, king d7, and white plays king d5. This is opposition number 2. And black loses. King e7, king c6. And now on king e6, white goes d4, and white queens by 4. So king d8, we go d5. Now, why this rule always works? Now on king d8, king d6, and you see black's move, and black loses because it's their move. Well, there is one rule. We know that this position, we just looked this type of position. If white's move, it's a draw. We put everything one square up. If white's move is a draw. However, if pawn is here on d2, white's pawn, then white wins no matter whose move is it. Because we know why black loses if it's their move, and if it's white's move, white goes d3. So if white does not have spare move, it's a draw. Again, we push one square down, it's a draw, no matter whose move it, well, only if it's white's move, of course, because black holds the opposition. Very important to know, if the king is on a back rank, this position is an exception. Now white wins, no matter whose move is it. Okay, we know why white wins if it's black's move, and if it's white's move, they just go king c6, king c8, and d6, forcing to play king d8 and d7. After king e7, king goes to c7, white wins easily. So opposition in those cases is important in a position where there are no other move but the king move. And when black's king is not on a very back rank. If black can achieve position where is white's move, it's a draw. If in this given position, black's move, black loses. This is very basic. Now this goes for any pawn. The rule applies to any pawn from B to G. With a rook pawn, of course, there are no rules. Black can just go to the corner, and there is no opposition can do anything. Black just goes king a8 and king b8. So there is any move they make in the corner of the board will lead to a draw. This is king and pawn versus bare king. It's very elementary, very simple, and every position you can create from there is either definite win or definite draw for one side, or loss, obviously. It's a definite, you can clearly predict result. There are some subtle type of positions, like, well, for example, king on g4 and king on pawn on g4, king e1, and king on c7. If it's a white's move. This is a little bit subtle position. We know if white just goes king e2, king d6, king f3, king e5, and king g3, king f6, and king h4, king g6. It's a draw. But however, white can win here. If they go king f2, king d7, king g3, king e6, king h4, and after king f6, king h5. You see, here opposition is lost by black, because in order to stop white from going king h6, they have to go king g7, and then we reach the position after king g5, where is the opposition, black is on the move, so they lose. So this is the very basic and very easy. It's also complete coverage of king and pawn versus king. Okay, here is another position where black is on the move, and you see if black goes to c6, they lose after king to e5, and if black goes to e6, then after king c5, they're still gonna lose the f pawn. But what is the result? It's a draw anyway. It's a draw anyway, because black is not fighting back. They just abandon the f pawn. They go king e7, king d5, and king e8. After king e6, they go king f8. And one rule only black has to know. Black has to play around their king around f7 square and wait when white plays king takes f5, and then they're gonna go king f7, and we have an opposition we just talked about, and it's a draw. One more position, black is on the move and black is losing. Now, what is difference between this position and the other we just looked? Because when black loses a pawn, and it's white's move in the opposition, but we said this is an exception. Opposition does not, rule of the opposition does not apply when black's king is on the back rank. Black is losing now, no matter whose move is it. White plays king e6, king e8, f6, king f8, f7, and white wins easily. Now this is this position with a pawn, black pawn on f6 is lost, and position, if we move it one square up, then it's a draw. But here is the very interesting position. Black is on the move. Is this a win or draw for white? White looks like white is penetrating, but this is a draw. This is a lot more complicated version of the opposition. Black goes king e6 and white goes king c5, and what we're going to see now, we see the mirror image of the opposition. Well, right here in the original position we have vertical opposition. Now you're going to see two different types of oppositions. After king e6, king c7, king c5, black goes king e7. You see the diagonal type of opposition. And white has to try to penetrate to g6. Unless they penetrate on g6, they will never going to win. Now on king d5, they go king d7, and now it's white's move, so no opposition. And on king c6, white is going to go king e6. And now we reached horizontal opposition, which is also draw. King c7, king e7. King c6, king e6. And on king c5, switch to the diagonal opposition. And on king d5, king d7. You see the opposition may be vertical, diagonal, horizontal. And here, black loses one opposition, but they're lucky enough to regain the opposition horizontally after white plays king c6 and king e6. So white cannot penetrate to g6, so it's a draw. This is very interesting example of the opposition. Position is a draw. Here is one interesting position we're going to look at. White to move. White goes this way. So if white plays king takes c6, black goes king c8, and this is an obvious draw. But however this position is winning for white, they can go king to d6. Now white is threatening b7 and b8 queen. And after king c8, now they're going to play king takes c6. And now they win very easily. King b8, b7, king a7, king c7, and it's all over. It's an easy win for white. So that's this is another example of the opposition. Now opposition, so it's a very important in pawn endings. However, there is another very, very important, a few other very important rules in pawn endings. One of them is an outside pass pawn. Well, let me give you the brief example of outside pass pawn. Well, here is one pawn. Here are two pawns. Well, actually two, and here is three pawns. Here is the position. The position is absolutely winning for white. And as a rule, I don't know, maybe 90% of the pawn endings where one side has outside pass pawn, maybe over 90, I would say closer to like 95, 98 maybe, percent of the position where one side has an outside pass pawn, they are winning. This is an easy win for white. What they do, they try to penetrate with the king, and when black stops, they have pawn to push a4. That's going to distract black's king. And after king e5, white is going to penetrate and clear whole king side. White is going to win every black's pawn, and they're going to make a queen. This is the outside pass pawn is a decoy pawn, which white is going to push to force opponent's king move to that side, and then your king will penetrate and clean up opponent's pawns. So this is very important rule on outside pass pawns that you know, and there are countless examples of the outside pass pawn. Let me show you something about outside pass pawn. This is a very, very interesting example. Well, here is white's position. Now this is very interesting endgame. This is queen ending. You said what it has to do with the pawn ending. It has to do a lot with pawn ending. The reason is this: if you know the rule of outside pass pawn, that's why it's important. Once you get the position with outside pass pawn, it's going to be very easy to play it. But sometimes you may have to decide whether you want to go to that position, whether it's winning or not. Here, white won the game by playing queen to c6 check, black must take, white takes, and black takes. Now, white abandoned their extra pawn, but after c3, black takes and white takes. This is easily won position for white, because white has an outside pass pawn. Why does it call outside? Because the other pawns are all on the right side of the board, and this pawn is on extreme left. So the way white is going to win, doesn't matter who plays actually, b4, maybe king d3, maybe even b4 move, and after king b5, king d4. This is already easily won for white. If black plays king takes b4, then king d5. Now white takes on d6, takes on g6, and it's very easy win. However, if black plays king c6, you may even go b5, and after king takes b5 and king d5, white wins easily. That's a very good example. Now, the reason why it's very important to know about the outside pass pawn, that is, it's a very high percentage of the games where one side has an outside pass pawn are won. So, like a 98%, and this does not look like an exception. So white in the queen ending, well, they have many different ways to play here, but once they played the right move, they won the game easily, because all they have to realize, you see, this was played by intelligent chess player. Intelligence, that means he knows about, he's knowledgeable, he knows about outside pass pawn, queen takes, pawn takes, king takes, c3. Regardless what black does, white is going to have white is going to have pass pawn, which is outside pass pawn. And now eventually white puts the king on d file and pushes this pawn until they deflect black's king, and then they will penetrate and clean up both pawns. White wins. So outside pass pawn, very important rule in pawn endings. Very important rule. Now, there is another rule that is extremely important in pawn endings. The rule called breakthrough. There are some positions in pawn endings where you don't have outside pass pawn, you don't have an extra pawn, sometimes you may be even down a pawn, and you may not have a good position, but you have breakthrough. Breakthrough means that one of your pawns runs away and makes a queen. There are a lot of interesting examples of breakthrough that we're going to explore now. Here's the first position. It's the elementary way of breaking through for white. See, this is a very controversial position. Looks like black has an outside pass pawn, and they do. They have the outside pass pawn. If white goes to catch the outside pass pawn, then black is going to come and may win all the white's pawns. However, it's white's move, and white has a breakthrough, f6. What is white trying to do? To take on g7 and make the queen. Now, g6 move is losing for black, because white simply plays h takes g, and now white has a very important protected pass pawn, so they can come and pick up black's b pawn, because king cannot protect the b pawn because f pawn moves, and they will win the b pawn, and they're gonna win the game very easily. So after f6, if black takes the pawn, g takes f, white plays g6. Now white is threatening g takes h and make a queen. Black plays h takes g, and now white does not take the pawn because black is gonna catch white's pawn on g6, and black is winning now. What white does instead, goes h6, and you can see that black's king does not catch white's pawn. And very important, how to catch the pass pawn. A lot of times, let me give you a little example of how to catch the pass pawn. There is a rule which you can apply to any that you can apply the rule to catching a pawn instead of calculation. And for example, if from far away, from like before you get to that position, you want to see, is your king gonna catch your opponent's pawn, or is your opponent's king gonna catch your pawn? And you see, I go here, he goes there, I go here, he goes there. No, there is a rule of a square. You have to remember the rule of a square. White plays king c3. For example, the king is on a7 somewhere. h5, king d4, h4, and king e4. Now, here is how you don't need to calculate. You see your king is in this square. Where is this square? Square is from e4 to e1, e1 to h1, h1 to h4, and h4 to e4. This is 4 by 4 square. And if king is in anywhere inside of the square, they will catch the pawn. Now, another example. Black's pawn is on h6, and white's king is on c6. This is also the rule of the square. See, 6 squares from h6 to h1, h1 to c1, c1 to c6, and c6 to h6. This is a square. And white's king, if white king's king was on b5, black is on the move, black goes h5, and you don't need to calculate. White is not going to catch this pawn. However, if king is on c6, you see that white's king is inside of the square, and there is the square, there is the square. So white's king is inside of the square, and you don't need to calculate. King is gonna catch this pawn. h5, king d5, h4, king e4, h3, king f3, king c6, h2, king g2. So white caught black's pawn. So this is the simple rule of the square. And here we applied this rule here in the position we just looked at. f6, pawn takes, g6, pawn takes. Now if we take on g6, black will play king e6, and you see the square. There's a 2 moves to g8 square and 2 moves back, so it's a square 3 by 3, e8, e6, g6, g8, e8. So black's move is in the square, but if after h takes g, white pushes h6, black does not catch the pawn. On king e6, white goes h7, and well, after king e6 you can tell that there is no square. Square is h6, h8, f8, f6, h6, and black's king is outside of the square, so black cannot catch white's pawn, so white wins. It's as simple as that. So this is the breakthrough. Now let me give you a little more complicated positions of the breakthrough. Well, here is one example, very well known, probably centuries old position. Looks like white is in trouble because black's king is closer to white's pawns, and this is the rare example where breakthrough is possible with equal number of pawns. Breakthrough we just saw in a previous example, white had more pawns on the king side than black, so that's why breakthrough was possible. However, now we have equal pawns and breakthrough is possible. It's a g6 move. White wants to capture either f7 or h7 pawn, so black must take on g6, and here is the mirror image. If black captures with h pawn, white pushes the f pawn, f6, and after g takes f, h6, and they make a queen and they win the game. And the same thing happens, as I mentioned already, mirror image. If f takes g, then we go h6, pawn takes on h6 and f6, and you see that black's king is not in the square f6, f8, d8, d6. Black's king is outside of the square, so they lose. So this is another interesting example of the breakthrough. Now, I want to wrap this breakthrough chapter with one of the most fantastic ways, one of the most spectacular breakthroughs I have ever seen. And this is the position. In this position, it's white's move. Looks like white can easily win if they go king c5. So white went king c5. It's hard to imagine here that white loses after this move. And here is the one of the most spectacular breakthroughs. f4, and white has three choices. White can capture on f4 with a g pawn, capture on f4 with the e pawn, or just simply capture on d5. Let's go through all of them. Capturing with a g pawn obviously is the worst choice, because after h4 you see there's going to be h3 and black easily makes the queen. So this is out of question. Now let's talk about e takes pawn. Now we see spectacular breakthrough, h4. Now black is threatening h3, so white must play g takes h. Now black goes g3, and if when white takes, black goes e3. Now it's very interesting that if king was on b4, white would have played king c3, and white is in the square. White catches the pawn. But after e3, in this position, white has a lot of extra pawns and totally lost position, because once black makes queens, they're going to clean them all up. So this is the second possibility. And the third possibility is king takes d5. And here, well, this is the a most spectacular way to break through. Black plays f3. White plays g takes f. And now, only way black can break through. Remember, e takes f loses because king e4, h4, g takes h, and after g3, king takes f3. Black loses. But the breakthrough works still, because after f4, king takes d5, f3. When white plays g takes f, here black plays h4. Obviously, they're trying to go h3, h2. White must take. Now black goes g3. Black sacrifices 4 pawns to queen 1. Now white must take on g3, and here e takes f. Finally, black queens, and they win the game. Now, what is the conclusion we can make? There are various different types of breakthroughs. So you have to remember that there is a possibility of breakthrough. Don't miss if you have one, and don't miss if your opponent has one, because you may get hurt. So when there is a breakthrough, remember the rule of the square if king can catch the pass pawn. And also remember that breakthrough and square, these rules go together. The other rule is outside pass pawn has also to do something with the square. And obviously, very important rule in pawn endings, keep your king active and try to get outside pass pawn. Those are very helpful rules. This is like a basic coverage of some interesting pawn ending